Being a trucker means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change, and constant change means constant danger. This was something that I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then, I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But boy, was I wrong. I had crossed the state border a while ago and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anybody else on the roads for miles and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck rolled a few more meters and then came to a halt. I just sat there for a minute confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention and thinking about it. I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I span around real fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s with graying hair and a mustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you've run out of gas," he croaked, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd be fine and started to walk back towards the truck. "I got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here at this location at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and didn't need any help, and I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this man to go away. I saw him walk off into the tree line and disappear. I called my boss up and he said that he had sent somebody out to tow me, but that it might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the man gone. I woke up sometime later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that somebody had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up, but maybe they tried. I am a deep sleeper and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to work out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and I had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted out to the tower, "Hey, where are we going?" Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage? After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn that we seemed to be heading towards. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so I called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said that the tower wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at my boss, "Well then who the heck is towing me?" My boss called the police and told me to try and get out of the vehicle. I didn't need telling twice. I swung open the door and jumped out. I was winded and I lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped and the tower must have heard the sound of the door opening. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and just chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized the face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking quickly now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer now, calling, "Turn yourself in and it'll be quick." I couldn't move anymore now, he would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log. looked around, and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away and looking right at me. I bolted back for the truck and made it underneath, the sound of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the woods. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all their questions and told them about the barn that I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When asking what they found, I was told that it was best I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in that truck. However, I do know one thing. That man is still on the loose, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. From a young age, I was told to never talk to strangers, and through my childhood, I never did. However, in adult life, things change, and there's more of a reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when you're lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I'd start giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place that I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people that I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive, I saw a man at the side of the road, with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place that I was going. Usually past a certain time, I would ignore it and continue my journey. But something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window, and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop on in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first, I was hesitant, and then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold, very cold. Not the kind of cold when it's been chilly outside, but the kind when somebody has a fever. A wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face and he looked like he was in his late 50s, with a gray beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was, "Pleased to meet you," and I got back onto the road. I decided it best not to try and talk too much to the man unless he had talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy that you would want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside his bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound of metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger that doesn't really want to talk, I would put the radio on, but mine had stopped working last week and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him from staring at me, I asked him, "Hey man, what's in the bag?" I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke, although I knew for sure that it wasn't. Throughout the journey, the rummaging got louder and louder and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled that I began thinking of what to do. I couldn't go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. He then stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had had enough and I pulled into the side of the street. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" And once again he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked him if he would mind checking it out while I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred and then got out of the truck and went around back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my taillights staring after me with what looked like a smile spreading across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood, and I can still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot trying desperately to forget the man, and then I realized that he had left his bag. Obviously, I couldn't help but look in it, but I wish that I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device, from knives and shackles to ropes and bars, and I then realized they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag into the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on it, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, at the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of my registration, and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me, but I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business." I've been a truck driver for some time now, and I've experienced many things on the road. Some have stayed with me for years, while some will probably stay with me forever. One of these experiences will for sure stay with me until the day that I die. I had been placed on a very long journey, taking a load 10 hours cross-country. There was nothing but dreadful music on the radio, and I was beginning to get tired. It had gotten dark some time ago, and it was now extremely late. I decided to call in for the night at the next motel that I came across. I didn't even care if it was a bad one. I now really wish that I had. I pulled up and looked around. The place looked awful. The paint was peeling off the walls and the windows were dirty, and there were multiple letters missing from the sign. The strangest part was that there were no cars in the parking lot. On any other occasion, I would have taken that as a strong warning to stay away, but I had been driving all day and did not have the energy to get back in the truck and drive somewhere else. I went over to the reception and nobody was there. I rang the bell and still no one came. I waited a few more minutes, repeatedly ringing the bell. Annoyed, I turned around and began to walk away, but then I heard a voice. I looked around to see an elderly man with very few teeth grinning at me wildly. He welcomed me to the motel and asked me if he could be of any assistance. I told him that I needed a room for the night and that I would like a room with a view of my truck. He fumbled around for a bit and then threw me a key with the room number on it. I paid him up front because I'd be setting off early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard him say in a muffled tone, "You have a great night's sleep." And then he chuckled to himself quietly. This should have creeped me out, but by this point, I was far too exhausted to care. The first thing I noticed when I entered my room was that it was not facing my truck, like I had asked. Instead, just the dumpsters on the other side of the building. The bed was comfy and the room was big, but I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. There were stains on the carpet, dark stains. The walls were covered in marks and there was something in a plastic bin bag in the bath. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. I lifted the top to see in and I almost was sick. Inside was the head of a pig, not nicely severed like a butcher would do, but a deep and rough cut. This was absolutely disgusting, but as the walls were crawling with cockroaches anyway, I decided it best not to use the shower or the bath, and I drew the curtain across. I tried to forget about what I had just seen. Even after that, I decided to still stay for the night and try to fall asleep. Yeah, I'm not the brightest. I awoke not to the sound of my alarm clock, but the sound of voices outside of my room. It was 2 in the morning. Who would be out of bed at that time? I assumed it was another guest, and I tried to get back to sleep. But before I could, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. I flew out of bed and into the bathroom and immediately hid in the tub, trying to ignore the pig's head that lay next to me. The curtain was drawn across, but I could see a small amount from a moth-eaten hole in it. I heard the door swing open and the sound of footsteps as somebody entered the room. I peeked through the hole to see a man in a ski mask walk over to my bed. He had something in his hand. The man threw off the covers and cursed. I then heard the voice of the man from the reception whisper, "What's wrong?" The man in the ski mask responded, "He's not here. Must have left earlier than we thought he would." I then saw the man start leaving and a huge amount of relief washed over me. But he paused, turned around, and walked straight into the bathroom. I felt like my heart had stopped beating. I tried to flatten myself into the bottom of the tub, although I knew it wouldn't do much good. He stood there for a good few minutes. I then heard the man cough, spit something into the sink, and leave. When I was sure that they were actually gone, I got out, grabbed my bag, and left. I used the emergency exit at the side of the building. I ran around to my truck, got in, started the engine, and drove off. As I was leaving, I saw somebody in the window staring at me, grinning that nasty, toothless grin. I didn't look back and I got out of there. I had driven nearly 20 miles when I was pulled over by a highway patrolman. He asked me if I was aware that my back doors were hanging open. I told him no when I went out to check it. A large amount of my load had been stolen and many other boxes had been slashed open. I told the patrol officer everything about the motel and what had happened to me. He shook his head in disbelief and told me something that made me gasp. That motel 20 miles up the road. Yeah, the owner died there 4 years ago. It's been abandoned ever since. As a trucker, I travel a lot, travel into places I wish that I hadn't been. And as a trucker, I see a lot, seeing some things I wish I had never seen. But it is these things that make me who I am, and that's why I love the job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foreplan how you will act in certain situations, and I do not make the right choices in certain situations. At all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north of England. It was dark with a few stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason and I kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed me doing this. I looked up and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body and it wasn't moving. I pulled the truck to the side of the road and climbed out. I approached the body slowly and I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over about to take his pulse, but then I realized there was no need. Blood was oozing out from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see that the man was dead and I knew that I had to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained to them what I had found. They said that they would send somebody out to me and to stay put. A few moments later, I heard a voice shouting and the sound of footsteps, fast footsteps hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of 2 men, one carrying a bag, and I knew exactly what that was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The man had made it to the body now, one chucking the bag onto it and then running for his car. I hadn't seen them parked on the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing that I could think to do: drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I had gotten away in time. That relief didn't last long as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining. I knew that I couldn't outrun him, but I could sure outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forward into my seat. By the time that I had recovered, he was gone. I didn't know where or how I hadn't hit him. I saw a turning a few yards to the left and could only assume that he had taken that. I put my foot down once again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up either. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was two cars that I recognized. It was the men, and they had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something that serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier, I talked about how in certain situations I make the wrong choices. Well, now was one of these times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me on what happened and how two cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and decided that the man had gotten away by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The two of them had killed the man that I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of an enemy gang. I still cursed myself that the other man got away. For some reason, I could never shake the feeling that somehow I'll be seeing him again. The mind is a delicate vessel. Feed it too much and it collapses. Feed it too little and it dissolves. But if you keep feeding the mind the same thing over and over, it becomes routine and nothing is out of the ordinary. Or so they say. Over the course of my trucking career, I've seen all manner of terrifying things more than any one person should be subjected to. And it is these things that have made my mind collapse. I hear a noise at night and it doesn't feel like an ordinary occurrence. Instead, it petrifies me. All the terrible things that I've experienced come rushing back to me, and all it would take is a snap of a twig behind me in the forest. My experiences have made me paranoid, but it is this very paranoia that saved my life. I had been driving for what seemed like days, endlessly moving forward along road after road after road, my eyes fixated on the ground in front of me. I was starving, I needed a break, and my Radiohead playlist was coming to an end. I pulled up to a petrol station and filled up the rig. I paid and moved it to a parking lot on the other side of the station. The parking lot was nearly deserted, but a few cars were scattered around here and there. I didn't like the feel of the place. Something about it made me shiver. I shrugged it off and went into the station for a coffee and a bite to eat. I returned to my truck an hour or so later and got in. I had driven a good few miles when I heard a tapping. I slowed my truck down and observed the road around me. There were no other cars, and where did that noise come from? I carried on driving, and after a while I heard it again, even louder this time. What was going on? By now I was incredibly confused, but continued driving nevertheless. After 20 minutes I heard repeated tapping. This time I knew exactly where it came from. It was from inside the truck. If I wasn't so paranoid all the time, I would have passed it off as something in the mechanics making the sound. But I knew I couldn't just assume that. I stopped it at the side of the road and got out. I walked around to the back, and the first thing I noticed was that the clamp had been busted off and that the doors had been tampered with. I was puzzled and opened them up. Inside, everything was as it should be, nobody inside and no boxes moved. It all looked to be okay. I reattached the clamp and got back in. I knew that something human had broken the lock. Maybe they broke it but couldn't figure out how to get the doors open. While this was unsettling, at least I knew nothing was in there. I drove back off into the night. I drove for hours more when eventually I suddenly felt a great uneasy feeling in my stomach. Something was in the back, I just knew it. I stopped the truck, got my gun out of the glove box and marched around. I undid the clamp and flung open the doors, my gun raised. Inside again, I saw nothing. I couldn't believe it. I knew that something was in there. I lowered my gun and was ready to walk away when I saw something shift. Somebody was climbing out from behind some boxes and standing up. The dark figure stood at the other end of the truck. I shot at him and missed. I shot again and again without hitting whoever it was. The thing started walking towards me fast. It had nearly reached me and I pulled the trigger, but my gun clicked empty. I threw it onto the ground and hurled the door shut, feeling pressure put against them on the other side. I managed to clip the bolt in and immediately called the police. They were with me quickly and I explained the situation. One officer opened the doors while the other covered him. Both of them entered the truck and began to look behind the boxes. A few minutes later, they got out and told me that they didn't find anyone, but they did find one thing. A carving of a body with a slit throat had been etched into one of the boxes at the back, and the knife was still stuck in. It was tested for fingerprints, but none were found. A few weeks later, I was driving along when I heard the tapping once again. I couldn't bring myself to look in the back. I just told myself that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I pray to God I was right. I have not been posting lately as I was off on a haul for a while. While on that, something happened to me, something awful. I can hardly close my eyes anymore without worrying something from my past will come back to get me. What happened to me on my most recent haul has darkened my past even more. While my mind tries to repress these things, it also tries to convince me that they are not over, and whoever has troubled me is coming back. I was taking my cargo through the mountains. No service on my phone, no reception on the radio, just the sound of nothing. It had been like this for miles, just me, my truck, and the road ahead. It was very refreshing, exactly what I needed after the trauma of my past years. I noticed the time and sped up. I wanted to be out of the mountains before dark, but at this rate, it wasn't looking likely. So time went on and I really had to go to the bathroom. I pulled up and got out. I was finishing up when I noticed something in the not so far distance, and this was the first time that I saw it. A creature resembling a man, a large man. I was about to call out when I realized that something was wrong with his face. I slowly came to the realization that this wasn't a man at all. The shocking thing was it wasn't any animal that I had seen before either. It stared straight at me. The 2-hour silence was finally broken by the loud cracking of twigs as this thing charged straight at me. I sprinted back to the van and got in. I immediately shoved the keys into the ignition. My peaceful trance had been snapped. I slammed down the accelerator, something that I had to do way too much these days. As I began to roll off, I saw the thing burst from the tree line and onto the road behind me. I was picking up speed, but so was the creature. I finally made it to around 20 kilometers per hour. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the thing standing in the road, staring after me with a snarl on its face, if it was a face at all. This thing must have been a seriously disformed man. It had a human's body but the stance of a wolf on its hind legs. its face much too big for a person. The eyes were not aligned and the mouth had retreated too far up its face. I shook my head and drove on. Another thing for my mind to repress and another thing to make my therapist tell me that I'm crazy. I had covered a lot of ground and had almost made it out of the mountain range. Dusk had fallen hard onto the horizon, and I had almost forgotten about what I had seen. My radio began to crackle, meaning that I was picking up reception, and it looked like my phone had a bar of signal. I was relieved, and in the first time in ages, I smiled. But that smile was ripped away from my face as I looked out of my window. Upon a high rock, up to the side of me was the clear silhouette of the man, its head turned and fixed onto my truck. My heart sank down into my gut and continued its descent as I saw the thing jump off the rock and charge down the hillside towards me. How the heck did it make it this far? There was no possible way for the man to have gotten there on foot. My confusion ceased when I noticed how close it was to me. I sped up, building speed way too slowly. The man was close now, almost able to grab onto the side of the rig. I noticed a corner up ahead. In the wing mirror, I saw him about to jump onto the back of the truck. I turned the corner very sharply. The thing had missed its opportunity and bounded off into the hills. I drove on for many miles. The darkness had settled now. I realized that my radio had stopped crackling and my phone still had no signal. I was sure that I was meant to be out of the mountains by now. I stopped, looked at my map, and immediately knew that I had taken a wrong turn. I had followed the signpost and had taken the sign that had pointed to Main Road. I thought back and recalled that the sign had been pretty wonky and had been tipped upside down. I realized how much of a fool I had been. Obviously, it was the wrong road as the sign its right way up would have pointed the other way. In all my fear, though, I hadn't batted an eyelid. Looking at my map, there was nowhere to turn around for miles. With a heavy sigh, I drove on. As I set off, I could have sworn that I saw something in the trees. Along the road, I kept noticing something walking behind the tree line, but I only saw it every couple of miles. I didn't even want to think about what it was. After what seemed like the longest drive of my life, I had reached the turning point, and I began to swing the truck around. Once I was facing the right direction, I let out a whimper. That thing was standing in the road in front of me. I got a better look at it this time. It was a man, and he was tall and very wide. His face, like I had noticed earlier, was extremely disformed. He began to walk at me very fast. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't wait there and I couldn't reverse. I locked my door and drove forwards, hoping to scare him off. For a brief moment, I thought that I did. He began to walk around the side. I then heard him climbing up the passenger side. I grabbed the keys from my pocket and locked the doors. In the same second, I heard the heart-wrenching tug on the handle. A split second later, and that thing would have been inside. I swore and I drove. The man was pounding on the window now extremely hard, thudding. This was the single most horrifying moment of my life. I don't know what I was thinking, but I rolled down the window a small amount. The man instantly stuck his fingers through, and then I rolled the window up quickly. He screamed and pulled them out, falling onto the roadside. I carried on driving, not looking back once. I made it onto the main road, turned the radio up to full blast, and almost cried when I saw other vehicles. My phone had signal and I called my boss, telling him what had happened. He didn't believe me, of course, and told me to take the next few days off, and that he would book me an appointment with the therapist in the morning. I felt so safe to be back on the busy road, and it was the happiest that I had ever been to see traffic in my life. I lay in my bed that night running things over in my head. As I looked out my window, I was almost sure that I could see something watching me. Surprisingly, I went straight to sleep and didn't wake up for 16 hours. I would never be driving through the mountains again. Recently, I've spent a lot of time staring out of my window at things that aren't there. Not because I'm going crazy, but because I'm not the man I used to be. In my previous years, I was a skeptical man, a rational one of reason and sense. Now I don't know what I am. All I know is that I'm ill. I've stopped seeing my therapist and have started drinking again. Anybody who's read my other stories would know what has driven me to this point. The things that I've experienced have finally pushed me over the edge. But I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here to get my experiences out. They can't stay trapped in my head any longer. They'll tear me apart. I've told many of my stories from across my trucking career. Some make perfect sense when I run them back through my head, but some will forever remain a mystery. And this is one of those stories. It was late, and as usual, I had been driving for hours at that point. The night was black and twilight had long since engulfed the valley. The static of the radio soothed me and I was in a trance. My foot on the pedal and my mind in a faraway place. I had been in this hypnotic state for the last 100 miles, fixated on the endless abyss that was the road in front of me. Suddenly I snapped. Somebody was stood in the road ahead. I wanted to stop. I wanted to slam my foot down onto the brakes, but I couldn't. It wouldn't move. I watched in horror as I plowed straight on through it. I waited for the sickening crunch of bone hitting metal, but it never came. Nothing followed the collision. No sound, no slam, no screams. Just the shock and confusion of what had happened. I didn't look back, just drove on into the night. Hours later, I had to pull up. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't drive any longer. My eyelids were extremely heavy, and it was no longer safe for me to continue on the road. I pulled out the bed and I went straight to sleep. I had awful nightmares of silence and disease. I was alone on a mountain range, a roar echoing down it like an avalanche. The ground shaking, a raging tapping boomed from above as the sky turned from blue into a dark shade of red, as if blood had spilled out across the heavens. That tapping grew louder, a thumping now, crashing and banging like the sounds of war. I woke. The tapping wasn't in my head. It was coming from outside of my truck. This was the most angry sound that I had ever heard, the noise of pure rage. I swept up my gun quickly and crawled up to the window. Outside stood a figure staring back at me. I could only make out his outline, no features, but he was tall, incredibly tall, and he took the stance of a wilted plant. I held my gun up to the window and hit back the hammer and I aimed it at him. He seemed to dissolve into the blackness, fading into the void of the night. I got back into the driver's seat and drove until I could see the light of day. Dawn finally slithered into the sky and I was peaceful. I made it to a fuel station and got out. Almost crying, I filled up and I paid. I didn't understand what had happened in the night. I didn't understand why it was me that had to face these things of such evil. I stood facing the side of my truck. I whimpered. Etched onto the side of my truck was 4 words. You will never rest.